So, okay. So we are going to continue on to take a look at our study in the Exodus. And you remember that we're in the second part of these lessons, and we're on the second lesson. So the very first lesson was talking about how God raised up a deliverer who happens to be Moses. And this is, tonight what we're going to be doing is talking about how God called a deliverer who happens to be Moses. We're going to be taking a look at Exodus chapters 3 and 4, if you want to kind of flip over there for just a little bit. Now, in Exodus chapter, by the way, does anybody have any questions up to this point? No? Okay. And so, if you recall, a couple weeks ago, we looked at how Moses grew up, how he was brought into Pharaoh's household, and that over in the book of Acts, chapter 7, he is educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was a man powerful in deed and in speech. Okay? We looked at how Moses at least understood God's plan for his life, and he decided that he was going to go and deliver his people. And you know what? To that regard, let me just kind of read you a quick little verse in Hebrews chapter 11 in that regard. Okay, so in Hebrews chapter 11 and in verse number 24, it says, "By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He disregarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward." And so that event where Moses goes and visits his people and he killed the Egyptian, from the book of Acts, we see that he was trying to lead a revolt. And from here, we see that it was kind of a conscious effort that he had come to a decision in his life of, I don't want to be with the Egyptians anymore. I don't want to live that life. I instead want to live this other life because I want to do this for God. Okay? And so, if you recall, after he did that, after the Hebrews came up and said, who made you a judge or ruler over us? Are you going to kill us like you did the Egyptian? He became afraid that the people were not going to follow him, that he was going to be inciting a rebellion, that there's no rebellion to be, and so he got scared and then ran off to Midian, where he got married, he had kids, and he became a shepherd. And that's, pretty much maybe what he thought, pretty much all that there was and all she wrote. But it was not. We come to chapter 3, and in chapter 3, we see that God comes to Moses. Chapter 3, Exodus chapter 3 and verse number 1, it says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the Mount of God." Now, Horeb is going to be the same thing as Sinai, because when the Israelites come out of Egyptian bondage, they come to where Moses led them at first. That's where God said, "Bring my people here." So, here's coming to Mount Sinai. Now, Mount Sinai is traditionally about right there. Okay, so if you want to go to Mount Sinai, then you can go there today, and they've got a big staircase going up there, and a monastery and a mosque, and everything like that, and it's kind of a big tourist area. Okay, is that the real Mount Sinai? Don't know. That's just kind of the traditional place for it, but with like a lot of traditional places, could it be that somebody just, went to a certain spot and said, "You know what, I just feel like God's showing me that this is the spot where it is. And so here it is," and then, they tell somebody and it sticks and it just gets handed down. That could have very well been the situation here. I don't really know, why they selected this spot. But there's other people recently who have proposed alternative spots that make a little bit more sense with archaeology and the description of what's found in the Bible and everything like that. From what is known in the Bible, the spot that is the traditional spot, it's kind of got some irregularities. I'm not saying it isn't, but another spot that's been proposed is over here in Saudi Arabia. Another spot is kind of over here. Another spot is over here. And so, there's all kinds of different spots. Now, what spot is correct? Well, God knows, and He didn't tell us, so I don't think that it's all that important that we know, right? But just keep in mind that here Moses is, and he is leading his flock, and he is coming to, as what it says here, the far side of the desert, and came to Horeb. So it's the far side of the wilderness. Another translation translates it the east side of the wilderness and came to Horeb. And so, wherever Horeb is, it's on the outskirts and probably the western side of wherever Moses was leading Jethro's flock. Okay? So, it says, verse number 2, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And so when Moses goes over here, what we see is here is this bush that is burning, but it is not burning up. Have you ever seen such a sight? Neither have I, and neither did Moses. And so when he saw a bush that was burning, but it wasn't burning up, what do you suppose he did? I got to see what all this is about. I got to get closer and see this strange sight of why in the world this bush is not burning up. And so as he gets closer, then all of a sudden we see that the Lord calls to him. So this burning bush is really what's called a theophany. And what that is, it is a visible symbol of an invisible God. Can we see God? No, we can't. And so this theophany was a way for God to be present with Moses and speak to Moses, and Moses, first of all, get the attention of, hey, what is this? And go over there, and then all of a sudden have this encounter with God. Okay? So as he goes over to have this encounter, God calls to him in verse number 4, Moses, Moses, and Moses says, here I am. And God said, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals. Place where you're standing is holy ground because this is where God is. And he announces himself as being the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Why do you suppose God needed to announce who he was like that? Now think about Moses and think about where he had grown up. Okay. How many gods were there in Egypt? Bunches and bunches and bunches and bunches. Now, I'm not saying that Moses was an idolater at this point in his life. I don't think that he was. But at the same time, just simply the way that probably his mind worked, if he's sitting there, here is God, okay, well, it's an announcement of saying, I am tying myself back to your forefathers. I'm tying myself back to these covenants that I have made with them. And so this is so very important because you remember in those covenants, God said that the Israelites are going to be in Egypt for 430 years, and then he was going to bring them back because it was time to judge the Canaanite people at that time, but not at the time that God spoke to Abraham. And so now, God is saying, hey, think back to these covenants. Think back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and think back to my agreements with them. Okay? So, in verse number 7, we see that the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. And so, does God see and hear what is going on over in Egypt to his chosen people? Yes, he does. Why has he not acted on it up until this point?
I think it's all about timing.
I was about to say, it's just not the right time, isn't it? Okay. Or it has not been the right time. Now, all of a sudden, it is the right time, and Moses is going to be the right person. In verse number 10, it says, so now, go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring out my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And so, Moses, you are it. You're the man, okay? Now, what we see, starting in verse number 11, is really interesting to me in regards of what Moses was and what spending 40 years in the desert tending sheep will make a person. Okay? Look at verse number 11. Verse number 11 and 12, we see Moses' first of 3 questions that he has with God. Okay? And so, what we see in verse number 11 is this, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring out the Israelites out of Egypt? And so, if we look at this, first question right here, who am I? Which doesn't really sound like much, but if you stop and think about it, that's a pretty important question. Okay? Now, by him saying, who am I, he's not really saying it in terms of tell me who I am, inform me who I am. He's really saying that question as a way of trying to inform God who he is. Okay? He's taking a look at himself and who he thinks he is and approaching it to God and saying, God, this is who I am. Are you sure you want me to do this? Okay? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? If you think about it, that's a pretty tall tale, right? Who am I that I am going to go to the most powerful ruler in this side of the earth, and I am going to tell him that I'm going to bring the people that he has enslaved and get them out of Egypt? Okay? What a tall order that is, right? Now, stop and think about this for a moment. Remember what we read about over in book of Acts chapter 7 about Moses, right? Moses, 40 years prior to this, what was he wanting to do? Kill an Egyptian and start a revolution. It says in chapter 7 that they did not realize, meaning the Israelites did not realize, that God was using Moses to deliver them. But at that time, 40 years prior to that, Moses evidently did. Okay? He evidently realized, hey, God is using me this. I've forsaken my people I've forsaken my adopted family people, the Egyptians, and I'm going to ally myself with my own physical people and especially ally myself with God. Okay? His approach back then was pretty much something that would have been a product of being educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, right? It's all about me. Who am I? I am great. I'm mighty. I can do this. With the Lord's help, I can take over the world by storm. Okay? 40 years later, he's asking himself the question, who am I? And he's coming up with the answer, I can't do this. There's no way. God, are you sure you have picked the right person for the job here? Okay? All right. So there's question number 1. Question number 2 is what we find in verse number 13. Verse number 13, Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them?" So question number 1 is, who am I? Question number 2 is just simply this: who are you? Okay? Now again, we're like, well, wait a minute, this is God. You shouldn't have to what do you mean? Who are you? Why are you even asking this about, what is your name and tell me who sent you and everything like that? But again, remember, the Israelites, they've grown up in Egypt. Okay? So they have probably held on to a lot of their monotheistic ideas, but at the same time, some of these polytheistic ideas have entered into the mix. And if you doubt me, then you can skip ahead into the book of Exodus and how quickly they turn to idolatry and worshiping the golden calf, right? Okay. And so if they had that way back, at that point, then they would have had the same kind of feelings back here in this. And so, Moses is just simply saying, okay, who am I? Okay. So then, oh, by the way, God gave him, forgot to give the answer of who am I. Verse number 12, God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." So there's Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, there's the connection right there. But the more important thing is that, going back to question number 1, as far as who am I, it is not by Moses' strength. God is saying, I am going to do this. I'm going to use you to do this. And there is a big difference between the two. Okay, now getting on down to the second question, who are you? What is his name? Then what shall I tell them? So Moses, God tells Moses, starting in verse number 14, God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are saying to the Israelites. I am has sent you to me." Okay, I know I've gone over this before, and so I'm going to go over it again a little bit, but I don't want to bore you. I want you to know it, but at the same time, I don't want to talk about it so much that you're like, oh, I've heard this a million times from you before. Okay, so here is God's name there in verse number 14. And in Hebrew, it is going to be written like this. Okay? All right. Now, in Hebrew, at least biblical Hebrew, back when, they were writing it, they didn't have any vowel pointings in this. This is all consonants right here. Okay? They didn't write the vowels because you just kind of figured out from the context what words you were using. And, if you spoke the language and you're fluent with the language, then you could look at it and you could say, oh, yeah, I get it. I mean, for example, what word is that? Okay, it is dog. At least that's what I was thinking, but it could also be dig, okay? And so, if it's a noun, it's probably dog. If it's a verb, it's probably dig. So you can kind of see that, the vowels are really necessary, at least for speaking, but for writing, our brains are smart enough that we can decode it, okay? Now, with this, here it is that people knew this name, and they knew this name because this was actually a derivative of this word right here. This word right here is a verb of to be, okay? And so, that was a common word back in that time, to be. And you see why God is using this in verse number 13 or 14. He says, the Lord said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are saying to the Israelites. I am have sent you." Now, this is kind of a third person singular form of this verb right here. And so, that's kind of what makes it into a name in that regard right there. But as far as the meaning of this name, it is, God is saying He is the existent God. He is the present God. He is the one that is real. He is the one that is now. He is the one that is living. There's all that idea about, I am, okay? It's I am who I am. I am what I am. It's just, you don't need to concern yourself what my name is. You just need to concern yourself with the fact that I am the true and the living God, is basically what he's saying. Okay? All right. In the course of time, the Jews started to feel like they couldn't speak this name because it was a violation of the fourth commandment, or was it the third commandment? Anyway, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. You're holding it, I couldn't see that. Was that third commandment? Fourth commandment is keep the Sabbath day holy. Violation of the third commandment. Okay? And so they stopped speaking the name. So if you've got a language that is really based on knowing what something is because of the way that it is spoken, then guess what? People lost, kind of lost understanding about how to actually say the name. Instead of saying this right here, what they would say is they would use the word Adonai, which is translated Lord. Okay? And so if they would write it, they would write this. If they would speak it, they would say Lord. Okay? So, what is this name and how do you pronounce it today? Have you heard of the name Jehovah? Have you heard of the name Yahweh? What's the difference between the two? Pronunciation. And that's all there is to it. Now, Hebrew is read from right to left, and so this yod right here can either have a J sound or it can have a Y sound. This hey is going to have an H sound right there. This wow or vowel is going to either have a V sound or a W sound, and then we've got this hey, which is again an H sound. Okay? And so when you look at this, you think Jehovah, Yahweh, these are two totally different ones. But when you start to look at it this way, you go, oh, wait a minute, there's more similarities here than you think, because J and Y really have a very similar sound phonetically. It could be J or it could be Ya. Okay? V and W have a very similar sound phonetically. In German, it's not Volkswagen, it's Volkswagen, right? Okay? When you listen, I don't know if you've ever, heard like Benjamin Netanyahu speak in English. And if you listen to him speak, when he's saying something that has a W sound, it will have like it's not really a V and it's not really a W. It's in between the two, which I find kind of interesting. Okay, and so you can see that, the V and the W are very similar, and then of course the H's are the H's. And so what is missing from all of this is what? The vowels. And we don't know what the vowels are because they didn't speak the name out of their reverence for God. And so you could say, okay, well, between this yod and hey, there can be a ja, and then there could be an O that is after the hey, ho, and then it can be an A in between the vowel and the other hey. And so Jehovah. All right? Or you could also do it and say, okay, well, there's a Y sound. And then after that is going to be a that is there. And then that's going to make that complete the consonant because it is a long vowel sound in Hebrew grammar. Okay? And so then you look at the wow, and so after that you can have this vowel right here, and so it's Yahweh. Okay? So Jehovah, Yahweh, you say, wait, those are two totally different words, but when you look at it like that, it's all the same. This is why when you're reading through the Old Testament and you come across with capital L, lowercase O-R-D, what you're really seeing is an English translation of this right here, the name of God. Okay? When you come across and just see Lord, that's different. That's actually that Hebrew word Adonai. But when you see this, capital L, lowercase, capital O-R-D, that is really talking about this name of God. Now, God is saying, Moses saying, what's your name? God is saying that, continuing on down, verse number 15, God said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I will be remembered from generation to generation. Now, you say, okay, well, this was not known to to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it was, because when you go back to the book of Genesis, you see it there, but it's not spelled out like, hey, this is my covenant name for you. As far as the Israelites go, in the covenant name, this is what's going to be so important to them. Okay? All right. Questions about that? Okay. I wanted to cover it, but at the same time, I hope I didn't, you guys knew all this, And as far as Jehovah, Yahweh, if you want to say, what do you say it is? I say it's this right here. I pronounce it Jesus. Because what we looked at in John chapter 8 just a little while ago, and that is Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. Now you see more of the importance and the degree of what Jesus told the Jews, and why they wanted to pick up stones to stone him for blasphemy so bad is because he was treading on what they considered sacred territory. But, Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is God the Son. And Jesus is worthy of worship in every bit as the God that appeared to Moses back here in the Old Testament, because that's who he is. All right. Okay. No other questions? All right. Question number 3 then. So in question number 3, we skip on down to chapter 4, and in verse number 1, we see that Moses answered and said, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Okay? And so the third question is more of, what if? What if they don't believe? You're sending me to these people, but what if they don't believe that you really did send me? Okay? So this is the Lord's answer. He said, what is in your hand? And he answers, a staff. So verse number 3, the Lord said, throw it to the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out his hand and took hold of the snake. I had this mental image of Moses like, trying to sneak up behind that snake and grabbing hold of its tail. All right. Okay. Grab the tail, and so Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was leprous like snow. Incurable, terrible disease. The Lord said, put it back. He put it back, and he took it out, and it was restored like the rest of his flesh. And so God said, if they don't believe you, do the first sign. If they don't believe you again, do the second sign. And then the Lord said, verse number 8, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, they may believe the second. But if they don't believe these 2 signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. Boy, that kind of sounds like what's going to be coming up pretty soon, doesn't it? Yeah, we'll wait next week maybe to get there. Okay? 2 weeks from there. Okay. So from there, from those three questions, now all of a sudden we get down to the root of the matter. And that is Moses just doesn't want to do it. And so we have two different times that Moses kind of protests all of this. And the first protest is in verse number 10, is Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." Now, wait a minute. What did we read over in the book of Acts chapter 7? That Moses was a man powerful in what? Speech and action. Okay? See what 40 years tending sheep can do to you, right? I mean, Moses needed to go through a humbling statement, a humbling stage. And I think that many times the Lord will allow us to go through a humbling stage. The reason for it is because Moses needed to see that his strength and his power and his abilities were not to come from his own self. What he needed to see is that all these things were going to come from the Lord. In order for him to see it, he has to be stripped of all of these things in his own life and in his own mind, so that when God is doing something, he's not going back and saying, "Wow, look at me." Okay? Instead, he's thinking, God's doing it and I'm just his servant. Okay? All right. But at this point in time, verse number 10, "I've never been eloquent. I'm a man slow of speech and of tongue." And notice how God answers him. Verse number 11. He says, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and teach you what to say." In other words, Moses, just go. Moses, God knows everything. Moses, God made you. Moses, God's taking care of this. Are you saying that God has selected the wrong person? That is something that we need to remember as far as, oh God, I can't do that. Well, wait a minute. If God's really wanting us to do something, then has God selected the wrong person? No, he has not. And so therefore, what do we need to conclude? We need to conclude that God's going to allow us to do it, right? Okay, but Moses doesn't get that. He protests the second time, and we come, it's kind of like here he is asking all these questions, like, trying to get out of it, and then he's protesting a little bit. Now we come to the root of the matter. In verse number 13, Moses said, "Oh Lord, please send someone else to do it. I'm just gonna, I'm out of excuses. I'm out of questions. I'm out of all these. I just send somebody else to do it. I just want to stay here with these sheep." And the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you." Interestingly enough, here is God telling Moses, "Moses, I want you to go do this." And Moses is protesting. And guess what? God's already got it all worked out. God's already got Aaron on his way. It's not that God said, "Okay, Moses, I'm listening to your concerns and I see what you're saying and you got a good point. Let me go send for Aaron." No, he's already sent for Aaron. Aaron is already on his way. So in that case, Moses, where else are you going to go at this point? Okay, well, so Moses goes ahead. What we see is that starting in verse number 18 is that Moses is going to start to make preparations to go. So in verse number 18, we see it says, "Then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, 'Let me go back to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive.' Jethro said, 'Go, and I wish you well.'" Now, the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and sons and put them on a donkey and started back to Egypt, and he took the staff of God in his hand. The Lord had said to Moses, "When you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then said Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go, so he may worship me, but you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son. Then we come to verse number 24, which I read a little commentary on it, and it says, this is the hardest passage in the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy to interpret. Well, I'm going to try and interpret it. Okay? All right, so verse number 24, the lodging place on the way. The Lord met Moses and was about to kill him, but Zipporah took out a flint knife, cut off his son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said. So the Lord let him alone. At the time she said, bridegroom of blood, referring to circumcision. What in the world is that? All right. I look at all this together and I see that this is kind of Moses making some preparations in going along the way. What we see at the very beginning is we've got Moses making some physical preparations, and that is that he's telling his father-in-law, hey, I need to go back to Egypt. And we got a little parenthetical statement there that the Lord had told Moses, the people that are seeking your life are dead. And so, so he's, evidently relaying that to Jethro. Hey, the man that wanted me dead, he's dead. God's revealed to me. So I need to go back over there. God has something for me to do. And so he packs up his wife and two sons and gets that staff, because that's going to be pretty important along the way, right? And he heads out. But then notice verse number 21. Verse 21 just really doesn't fit, does it? I mean, if we read this and we skip over verse number 21 to verse number 23, then it kind of better fits as far as the description of the story. And that is that here is in verse number 18, Moses goes back to Jethro and says, let me go see them. I wish you well. And so Moses takes his wife and his sons, put them on a donkey, started back to Egypt. He took the staff of God in his hand, skipping down to verse 24. At a lodging place in the way, the Lord met Moses. Right? So where is this that God tells Moses all of these things? Well, notice it says in verse 21, the Lord said to Moses, or it could be translated, the Lord had said to Moses. In other words, this is something that the Lord had previously said to Moses. It doesn't have to be that Moses leaves Jethro and the Lord tells him this and then this happens. It doesn't matter when the Lord says this. It's just that this is what the Lord said. So what did the Lord say? Well, the Lord, in fact, a lot of the things that we skipped over in chapter 3 was some of the little bitty details that the Lord was going to be telling Moses about, generally speaking, what was going to happen. And so this kind of falls in line, but this is going to be the last of all those plagues, isn't it? And that is that the Lord was going to cause the death of the firstborn children of Egypt. Why? Well, it's right here. And that is that Pharaoh was not allowing Israel to go, which is God's firstborn, in sense, Pharaoh, in essence, is killing God's firstborn, then this is justification for God to kill his firstborn. Okay? All right. Now, all of a sudden, we see in verse number 24 that here is an issue with Moses's. Maybe not his firstborn, it could be a secondborn, but here's an issue with Moses' son. Now, what's the issue? Well, the issue is that way back in Genesis chapter 17, God told Abraham that he and his descendants after him must circumcise their male children as a sign of the covenant between him, Abraham, and the Lord. Okay? So here is Moses, and Moses is going to be the deliverer and the executor of what that covenant entails of bringing the people back out of Egypt and into Canaan. But yet, here's Moses, and one of his children has that sign of the covenant, the other one doesn't. Do you see Moses is kind of a lacklusterness here? I mean, he's not all that concerned about things, is he? Just kind of like, oh yeah, I'll do this for the Lord. I won't do this for the Lord. That's not going to be a very good thing to go into the things that the Lord is going to be having for him. As a matter of fact, you go back and you look at all of these things, all these excuses and questions and protests and everything that Moses has been giving the Lord. It's kind of like, Moses, you need to have some attitude adjustment straightened out right here, right now. You need to have the fear of the Lord. And you need to be sure that you get your own house in order right here and now, because you've got a bigger house to get in order too, the Israelites, right? And so here we have the Lord meeting Moses and was about to kill him. Would the Lord have killed him? Well, it's a what-if question, isn't it? It doesn't make any difference, because the Lord knew what was going to take place, and that's the reason why God selected Moses. But God selected Moses after humbling him to come up and say, okay, now you need to start getting serious about things, and this is how the Lord is really going to get his attention. Moses, I'm about to kill you. What? You just told me that I was going to go back and lead the children of Israel out from, okay, yeah, I get it. I need to be obedient to you. I need to put you first. I need to look and see your commandments and start to do what you command. It doesn't really matter what I think. Doesn't really matter what my wife thinks. It matters what you think. And so, here's the Lord about to kill Moses, and his wife steps in, and I don't think that she's very happy about the situation, is she? Because afterwards she said, "You are a bridegroom of blood to me." Okay. But circumcises the uncircumcised son, puts the foreskin at Moses' feet. There's probably some interpretational things that go on with that, but I'm not even going to get into them. But you can kind of see where and why all of this takes place, is that Moses is now ready to go physically. Now he's ready to go mentally and spiritually as well. Okay, I've been talking a lot. You guys haven't been talking any. You guys got questions and comments about any of this?
I just don't remember those verses. It's like, that's totally new to me, so.
Okay. Well, it's funny because when we were having our discussion next week, Mara says, I've got a question. And I was thinking, I know where this is going. So.
Right to it. I did put a question concerning circumcision.
Okay.
That, again, because God's people and the Jews are God's people.
Right.
Then as far as the Gentiles, that never came an issue with whether they did or they didn't.
No, it is. And here's the reason for it. First of all, as far as spiritually goes, the circumcision was not ever a part of being saved. People in the New Testament time, they were believing that it was. And so that's why when you look at the New Testament in the book of Acts, the Jews were saying, you've got to circumcise your children. And, you look at the book of Galatians, you see, no, the circumcision has nothing to do with grace. And so, especially with the fulfilling of the law, that isn't there, number one. But number two, the idea about the Jews in circumcision is it was a sign of their covenant with God that was made to Abraham. And so, and not to be too graphic, but you can see that here's Abraham and Sarah who are sterile. And so that sign of the covenant where Abraham was going to be the father of many nations, you can see that here is the severing and removal of the foreskin ahead of that, okay? Not that that has anything to do with medical sterility or anything like that, but it's a lasting sign of the covenant for the Israelites to understand, hey, wait a minute, this goes back to our forefather Abraham, and this goes back to the covenant that God has with him to make us father of many nations, okay? Now you go ahead to the New Testament and you see that there's the spiritual circumcision, and Paul talks about that as far as we are included in the children of Abraham but spiritually speaking, because of faith. And so by faith, we remove the hardness of our heart and we submit ourselves to the Lord and believe in Him. And so therefore, we have a circumcision of the heart that's there. Okay? All right. Anybody else? That's a good question, by the way. All right. Okay, well, then we will leave it off right there. And we'll kind of finish up with, in fact, I'm just going to finish it up right here now and say that here's Moses and Aaron, and they meet up at the end of chapter 4, and they hug each other, and then they go on to Egypt. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at next week is chapter 5, and going into chapter 6 as well. And we're going to be looking at Aaron and Moses and how they approach the Israelites and how they approach Pharaoh. And so chapters 5, 6, and getting into chapter 7 as well, just a little bit, okay? Or halfway through. Okay.
You already answered one of my questions for next week.
What's that? What are we doing?
No, I read ahead.
Okay.
And in chapter 6, Abraham referred to God Almighty.
Okay.
And then and Isaac and Jacob, God Almighty. But here Moses, the Lord.
That's it.
But you just described it, so I can throw this note away already.
Okay. And it's not that, in the Old Testament that God is never referred to as God, because He is. And He's referred to in other ways, in other places. But as far as that covenant name goes, it is, we see it in our English translations, capital L, slower but still capital O-R-D. Okay? When you see that, just think, Yahweh, or Jehovah, or better yet, Jesus. Okay. All right, let's bow our heads. Dear Lord in heaven, we thank You for everything You've given us. We thank You for Your word. We thank You for the guidance and the direction that it gives to us. And Lord, we thank You for being the all-knowing, the ever-present, and the ever-living God. And we thank You for being who You are and still being willing to have a relationship with us, knowing who we are. Lord, we ask that You would, with Your grace and Your mercy, take our lives and use them for Your plan and Your purposes. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.